Hey everybody, it's Paula and John.
And welcome to our summer series, School is Out for Parents.
And this week we are talking to a father of two, James Clear, the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Atomic Habits, which has sold like 15, 20 million copies.
One of my favorite books that I've read, very, very influential in my life and in my business.
And today, John and I are going to share some of our favorite moments from this episode with James Clear. I have to say before we jump in, the only thing I don't love about James Clear.
Okay.
He lives in Ohio, Columbus. And so I had to wear my Michigan Wolverine shirt just to show my allegiance. James, I love just about everything about you. This is where we're going to disagree forever. Go blue. That's all I have to say. But what I love about this episode and the highlight that we're going to bring to you, he talks about the mindsets in our kids and also creating healthy habits for our kids. One thing that really stood out to me, John, is like the environment. What kind of environment are we priming for the kids? If we want them to be on screens less, which we do this summer, then what is the space designed to do? If I want them to eat healthier, am I making it obvious and easy and accessible? So like I'm buying fruit now and I'm washing it and I'm leaving it on the counter because I know they'll grab it if it's out. And I know they'll play less screens if it's not what the space is designed to do, if they have to make an effort to go do it.
Yeah, one of his laws is to form a new habit is make it easy. And if it's easy, it's probably going to get accomplished.
Yeah. And the other thing that he talks about that's really powerful, I think for parents, but our children, is instilling in them a positive mindset. And that's just a shift from I have to do something to I get to do something. And he gives an example in this recap for you where he talks about, his kid falling down, skinning his knee. Yeah, it hurts, but you're going to be just fine. It's how we react to those moments and how we can create positive, healthy mindsets in our children. Look, you're going to be okay, because they're going to feed off of our reaction to it. And you're big on mindset, John.
Oh, for sure. It's the source of everything when it comes to, how you end up being successful in life. If you think success, you're going to be successful. If you think negativity, you're going to be negative.
Without further ado, here's our favorite moment from James Clear. But some of the struggles that I know personally I have, and I've talked to my audience about what they've struggled with parenting, I'm just going to list them. Bad parenting habits. We're super distracted. We don't set limits. We don't enforce things. We're not always on the same page. I know personally I'm not always on the same page as my husband. We give in because it's easier. We try to be a friend instead of a parent. We're not listening. We do too much for our kids. We criticize. We do things for them because it's easy, not because it's right. So those are a lot of bad habits to kind of tackle. But what I'd like to do is start off with maybe asking you, what are some of the habits that you have implemented into you're a father, into your own life to help you be a better parent?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly many of the things you just mentioned resonated. I think the most immediate things that come to mind are not necessarily habits that I need to build, but mindsets that I needed to change that then allowed me to build new habits. One of the things that has surprised me, or that maybe has just been difficult about becoming a parent, is how much of it is actually not about the kids. It's about reprogramming yourself. It's like you have this natural response to a certain situation, or this certain way that you think about things, or this mindset that you get into. And as a parent, you cannot expect that if your weaknesses go unaddressed, that they won't be passed down to your kids. Like, you not only pass down your genes, you also pass down your mindset and your way of being.
Makes sense.
And so it's really a lot of self-work to try to change your mindset about things. Like, let me give you one example. You mentioned one of the things that you said was, we do things for them because it's easy, not because it's right. I really had to release this notion of there is a right way to play with something. My kids are really young, right? They're like toddlers right now. So I had to remind myself. It sounds so obvious, but you don't think about it. You see a book or a puzzle or some toy that you give them, and you're like, oh, this is how it's supposed to work. Like, the rings are supposed to go on this way. Mm-hmm. And you have to realize, no, however they play with it is fine. You don't have to do it for them to show them the right way to do it.
Right.
If they're 2 years old, they can just engage with it and they'll learn all along the way. And so what I'm getting at is this larger principle of releasing the need for things to go a certain way. And it's like, if you need it to only be one way, then you're being held hostage by the situation. and you end up like forcing your kids into that same little box.
Do it this way.
That's one small example. The other thing that, and this does lead more to habits that we've built that have been really helpful. You start to realize how much a product of your environment any human is. Mm-hmm. And so if you can prime the environment to make the next action easy, then you put yourself in a much better position. And I think a lot about that. Like, how are we putting the kids in a good position? I don't necessarily need to do it for them, but am I setting them up so that they can figure it out on their own, or they can do it well, or they're in a space where even if they fail, it's still pretty safe?
Sure.
And if you look at kindergarten classrooms and how they're laid out, a lot of them like kind of utilize this environment design principle. So for example, if a kid is in the blue reading group, they might sit in the blue chair, or their books go in the blue bin, or they have a blue folder. And that cohesion between the environment makes it easy for the kid to know what they're supposed to do. And whenever I came across examples like that, that was one of the examples I came across writing Atomic Habits. I was always surprised how much those principles work for adults too. So like, I went to this CrossFit gym. They had trouble with people putting the weights back and all the gear back at the end of the classes. It would just be a little sloppy. And so at the end of one day, the owners put everything back where it was supposed to go. And then they took a picture of the wall and they printed it out and they put it on the wall. And they said, this is what the wall should look like at the end of each class. And all of a sudden the adults were like, oh, okay, I know where to put the box now. And like, it's exactly like in kindergarten, or being like, oh, I need to put the toy back in the blue bin, you know? And so all humans respond to their environment like that. And there's so many things that you can do to set the environment up for success. Like another example, a lot of people feel like they watch too much TV, or they feel like their kids watch too much TV. You don't want them looking at screens as much. Well,
Guilty.
If you walk into, walk into any living room, where do all the couches and chairs face? You know, it's like, what is this room designed to get you to do?
Yeah.
And so you like look at the spaces where we're living and working, and you're like, well, what are we setting it up for? And I think one interesting thing you can do is just hold a habit in the back of your mind, one that you're trying to build, or you're hoping your kids will build.
Sure.
And then look around the rooms where you spend most of your time each day and ask yourself, what is this space designed to encourage? What is obvious here? What is easy here? And you'll start to notice different things that you can do to maybe make the good habits the path of least resistance and the bad habits less likely. So for example, you walk into the kitchen. What foods are out on the counter? What's most visible? What's most accessible? Is that what you want everybody eating or not? Walk into the living room. Do you see screens as soon as you walk in there? How can you change that? Could you take a chair and turn it away from the TV, have it face an end table with a book on it?
So good.
Could you put a TV behind a wall unit or a cabinet so you're less likely to see it? Is the video game console like just out and on the floor for everybody to use, or is it tucked away in a drawer? And individually, these are very small actions. I'm not going to act like any one of those things will transform your life, but you can start to imagine collectively, if you make a dozen or 2 dozen or 50 little adjustments like that, now all of a sudden the house and the spaces that you're in each day are optimized for the things you want to do and not the things that you don't want to do.
That's so good. It's that 1% rule again, you know, just the little things, and then that will have that compound effect over time.
Yep.
That's so good. What are some of the, okay, so this is something that I struggle with, is being consistent. And I don't know if you have any sort of habit that could help my husband and I, because one thing you'll notice when your kids are a little older, they try to, it's not that they're trying to pit you against one another, but they'll say, well, they'll come to me, Dad said I could do it. I'm like, okay, but Dad didn't say that they could do it. And so we find that, especially our youngest, I mean, we have 3 kids, and like, he's just hanging on for dear life at times, but we're so inconsistent, and that's a huge struggle. And then it becomes a huge strain on our marriage too. Do you have any sort of guidance for habits that my husband and I, can implement? And I'm not trying to ask you to be a counselor or therapist. You can say pass if you don't have an answer. But is there anything that we can do to help us be more consistent as parents and be on the same page?
Yeah, you know, it's so tough. Like, so much of your time gets swallowed up as soon as you have kids, especially multiple kids. One thing my wife and I have realized is that the only time we actually talk anymore is when we go on a date. Like, and so we've started to like really be like, we need to prioritize doing this because it's really the only time that we actually get 2 or 3 hours to actually talk to each other. And of course we're talking throughout every day, but it's just that we aren't actually having conversation. We're like handling logistics basically, and you get to the end of the day and you get the kids down and then you're like, okay, well, it's going to take an hour to like do the dishes and clean the house up and get everything set for tomorrow. And then you sit down and you're like, well, we have like 30 minutes before we're going to go to bed, but we also need to talk about what's going to happen the rest of the week. And you're like, basically all the time gets swallowed up. You don't actually have any time where you sit down and just like chat for an hour.
And like look each other in the eye. That might
and talk about some of those deeper things that are like not just like tasky, but like values and connection and meaning and all the things that come up when you have like a real conversation and not just are like working through a task list. I guess my short answer for that is, where's the time coming from? When does that time exist? What we found is that it basically only exists if we go on a date. So we're like, well, we need to make sure we do that at least every month, hopefully twice a month. But, if we can do one, that's better than nothing. That's one thing that we've kind of stumbled across. The other thing is, it's been so hard for me to learn this lesson, but I do think it's true. I'm not going to say like, don't be ambitious or give up on your dreams or whatever, but I do think you need to narrow your dreams. So like, it may not be the season or the time for everything right now. And that's really hard for me because I have a lot of things that I want to do. For the first like 18 months to 2 years of being a parent, I tried to force fit all my old habits into my new lifestyle. And eventually I realized, okay, dummy, like you have like 40% of the working hours that you had before. So why do you think you can keep doing the same stuff that you were doing pre-kids? I think the big question is just what season am I in right now and what habits are appropriate or fit best with this season. And it doesn't mean you can't do the other stuff ever. It just means that maybe now isn't the right time for it.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
Everybody knows that you only have 24 hours in a day and you have to prioritize and say if no to things or whatever. But I think if you are not feeling like you're sacrificing something by saying no, you're probably not saying no enough. Like you need to feel like it needs to actually be a little bit painful. And you're like, man, I really wish I could do that.
That's good.
But I have to say no to it so that I can have the space to fully show up in the things that I'm still going to do. That can be tough. That can be a tough lesson to learn and a tough thing to practice day in and day out.
What are some habits you're trying to instill in your children right now?
Right now, it's all the, they're so young. It's all the basic stuff like learning the alphabet and learning how to read and, loving books and enjoying spending time together. And there's also just like all kinds of things they learn. Like my daughter just started going to preschool. So it's like she's learning how to listen to a teacher and how to engage with other classmates, things that like aren't explicitly being taught, but are just good to learn to, good to learn to show up in the world and be a functioning member of society. It's all like basic stuff like that. But what I'm thinking more about right now is like, what kind of mindsets do I want to instill in them? How am I talking about that stuff with them? Like when they fall down and scrape their knee, like how do I talk to them about that? So that they like, of course I want them to feel safe and feel like, I'm there for them and I'll take care of them. But I also want to right size that and not make it seem like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened. It was such a terrible thing that happened to you. It's like, well, skinning your knee doesn't have to be a terrible thing. Like everybody skins their knee. And like, I'm going to be there. I will always be there for you to comfort you. But also this is a pretty small thing and you can deal with it. And like, you're going to be okay.
It goes along with like reprogramming your brain, which you talk a lot about. Like I get to cook dinner for my family. I get to wake up. Even the example you gave in your book about the guy that was in the wheelchair who you thought would have a woe is me mindset. But he's like, no, are you kidding me? I get to be in a wheelchair every day and go around and talk to people. And instead of being in my bed, laden in my bed.
People were like, do you feel hindered by your wheelchair? And he was like, I don't feel hindered by it. I feel enabled by it. Like it allows me to engage with the world and move around. And I love little mindset shifts like that. I have a list of them that I keep. Like one that I always think of. So COVID hits, everybody gets locked down. Everybody feels kind of like shut up. It's almost like your own little form of a prison. You're like, oh, I feel like a caged animal. And I saw somebody who said it's not a prison, it's a chrysalis. Like the, cocoon that that a caterpillar goes into and then comes out as this transformation of a butterfly. And I thought, man, what a beautiful mindset shift.
That's great.
Instead of being like restricted, like, oh, I can't do anything. It's like, just wait until you see what I transform into out of this period.
Yeah. And that's good.
I love things that are like that. And, there's that other famous one of like, I'm not losing, I'm learning. And, little things like that sometimes can sound trite. And it doesn't mean that it feels good to lose or that you're trying to make mistakes, but maybe it gives you a different lens to find the good in the experience and to find the useful part of it and latch onto that.
John, we can't say enough about the positive mindset and building that into our kids. And it's honestly something so simple that we can do on a daily basis, but it's got to start with us. Do you have any examples of how we've woven this into our own parenting and our own lives?
Well, what was so intriguing about this interview is most people who are reading Atomic Habits, they're reading it to be more successful in business, to be more successful in their personal life. But I've never really heard him take some of those principles and drill them down into parenting. And so many of those are very transferable. The way, like you said, the mindset and how we can create an environment for our kids and being intentional about that, I think is very, very important. So I had never really thought of Atomic Habits as a parenting book, but so many of those principles are so key to be a successful parent.
Yeah, and I think mindset is huge. Like this summer, our kids have a lot of sports practices. Hey, guess what? You don't have to go. You get to go. You get to go and you get to grow and you get to be disciplined and your body gets to grow physically and emotionally and spiritually. So that's something that has really transformed my parenting. All right, you can watch the full episode on YouTube or you can listen to the full episode. It was episode 1 from season 2. And we are going to be back next week with our series, School is Out for Parents. I know you guys thought you were done with me, but not quite yet. I have one more thing to tell you about. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe to the show. I don't want you to miss a single beat or a single conversation. And remember, my DMs are always open. Tell me what you want to talk about.